Okay, so we should be up on YouTube now.
Oh, cool.
This is 236. $336. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So it looks like Hal is bailing on us. He said he just packed his computer up in a box.
Oh, what's he moving?
Driving to Orlando through next week. I'm unclear if he just had a catastrophic failure or...
I know he has the vacation place.
Right. Yeah, so I'm not sure what the story with that is.
Oh, well.
Let me get the chat up here. We've actually been watching a lot of movies as a family recently.
Yeah, well, we have to, right?
I was just upstairs watching Monsters, Inc., which I hadn't actually seen before yet.
Oh, I love that movie.
And then I looked at the clock. I'm like, oh, wait. I got to go downstairs like right now. Yeah, my daughter wants to go through the Marvel films now, so we watched Captain America the other day. And
yeah, we binged the entire Avengers. So not all the Marvels, but we did all the Avengers all the way through in one day.
Oh my gosh. Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, we closed all the blinds and just sank into the cave and vegetated.
Nice. Yeah, she and I just watched through Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is my favorite. That's my favorite TV show of all time.
I really like that. I wish the movie had done better.
Yeah, that M. Night Shyamalan is dead to me for that. That was, oh my gosh. Thankfully, though, and the original creators are trying to do a live action thing on Netflix, so that I have some hope for that.
Yeah. Yeah, you need time. Doing that as a feature is so hard.
Yeah, and I never finished watching Korra. I can't remember how far I got into it, but I found out recently that there's 4 seasons, and I'm sure I didn't make it past the 2nd season, so I think we're going to watch that. Let's see. Okay, cool. I think we're all set. So tonight on the PowerScripting podcast, we have with us again Mr. Don Jones. How are you, sir?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
I am doing fine. I am getting through this pandemic by
crazy.
Yeah, watching movies and playing the cello. I started learning the cello in January, and practicing the cello has been really good for me, which is surprising.
Yeah, I've been keeping sane by, well, we were up at our cabin for a while, so there's a lot of snow to shovel and a lot of wood to split, and then just writing as much as I can, and it occupies my mind.
So, but I'm sure you're still doing all your Pluralsight stuff remotely, right?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Company's pretty much fully operational.
That makes sense. Yeah, we are too. There's no telling when we'll be back in the office, but nobody seems to care. It's not slowing anything down.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was talking to my team, and we're all remote. And I said, yeah, because they engage with the other teams more than I do. I'm like, people eager to get back. They're like, no, everybody seems to have kind of gotten into it. Like they want their kids to go away for a minute, but otherwise everyone's good.
Yeah, I think it was been most difficult for my children because they didn't get to see their friends at the end of the year. My son had to move out of his dorm and move back home, and it just stuff like
that's
that.
Rough.
My wife had to teach her classes remotely. She teaches American Sign Language 1 and 2 to high school age homeschool students. And so she ended up doing that over video. And, it all worked out, but it was a lot of work she wasn't intending to do.
Yeah, it's not the same.
But it has been good. Now, have you done any of the build stuff? Have you watched any of that?
No, and it's funny. I think it's so cool that Microsoft just decided to make the pivot and do it, and I know how fast it happened. I am not the type of person who can sit in a live session. Like okay. I keep looking for the 2x button. I just go faster. I want to scrub ahead. It's the hi, I'm so and so. I don't care who you are. And it's weird because I spoke at conferences for 22, 23 years. Can't do it.
Mm-hmm. That's funny.
So I'll have to catch the recordings for, whatever comes along. But I'm not as dependent on being like day to day updated with the tech as I used to be. So right. There's also not a sense of urgency.
Sure. Yeah, and the stuff that I saw, I've only caught bits and pieces of it, and the stuff that I saw was pretty, maybe like 100, 200 level kind of stuff.
It usually is.
It wasn't anything, too deep or hardcore or anything.
Yeah, it usually tends to be. This is where they make product announcements. This is where they try to get people interested in new technology, new stuff, new platforms, try to whet their appetite, and then you follow up later if you're interested. Ignite is pretty much the same thing. Like it mm-hmm. doesn't usually get super deep. Some people do, but for the most part, it's not.
Yeah, usually though we at least get a couple PowerShell sessions for Ignite, and they like to announce stuff there, and and that's the ops show, and that's the PowerShell audience, so that's why PowerShell doesn't really hit the dev audience, and that's the build show. So. Okay, yeah. And I'm making an assumption that basically all of our listeners know who you are, which maybe I shouldn't do, but you have been on so many times. But do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. My name's Don Jones. I am still, for at least 35 more days, a PowerShell MVP. I was probably, I think I published the first 1 or 2 books on Windows PowerShell, so I've been working with PowerShell since before the beginning of time. I helped found PowerShell.org. I helped start the PowerShell and DevOps Global Summit. And I recently have finished the main manuscript on a book of PowerShell's history, all the background stories and how it nearly didn't come to be about 4 different times. It's called Shell of an Idea. And
I read a version of that. I'm not sure how much
Yours is pretty recent.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much it's been updated since then. But
not a bunch.
It was so cool because that I obviously lived through that same period. And one of the things that I really like that you did in the book is there are sections like early in the history of PowerShell where you talk about the types of things that are going on in the industry and kind of where computing was at those stages. And it was really cool to have that put in context again, to realize, kind of how far technology has come since then and how much things have changed. And
the thing that PowerShell was created to solve originally doesn't make a lot of sense to people now that we're where we are. Like, you have to understand the context it was in, and what got it there. The original project that became PowerShell, Kermit, almost doesn't make sense in today's day and age. Like, if you reiterated those same problems to a 22-year-old person today, they'd go like, I don't get it. You can already do that. We're like, yeah, I know, but back then. So I wanted to make the book accessible to someone who didn't know what PowerShell was, and obviously knew what a computer was, but maybe wasn't an IT operations person, or they weren't a programmer. So I wanted to provide some of that kind of background. So I did want to get in and explain those things. I think even a lot of people now don't realize, like, what was PowerShell trying to solve. You can say, oh, it's trying to solve automation. Well, it wasn't, because technically you could do automation. It was just hard.
Yeah.
And there were specific things that made it hard, and those were the things PowerShell was trying to solve. And I do feel that even today, now that it's moved beyond Windows and it's on everything, I think understanding that context really helps you understand why it's important and why it matters, and why it's just as valuable a tool on Unix or Linux as it was on Windows.
Yeah, that makes sense. And why did you choose to make it that accessible to the point where, somebody who may not be familiar with PowerShell, who may not, be an expert with computing systems or have that kind of history?
Partially because, when you start getting into some of the stories about PowerShell and its creation and how it came to be and the persistence it required and the struggles it went through, there's a lot of lessons in those stories that apply to anything. And the stories don't make sense unless you understand their full context. But once you understand that context and you hear the story, you're like, crap, I wanted to launch a new hamburger chain, and I'm running into some of these same underlying assumptions and behaviors. And I kind of get how PowerShell moved past that, and I could maybe apply that. I think there's a lot of career lessons there.
Okay.
I think there's a lot that people can look at and say, weirdly, that resonates with me, and I get it. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to write it, because there's so much wealth in those stories. I mean, some of them are just fun, but there's so much wealth in those stories, and like, the people who know them are leaving. A lot of the original PowerShell team isn't at Microsoft anymore.
Right.
None of the executives who were there then are there now, which is partly why the book can be written now, I suspect. But I felt those stories really needed to be captured and saved, and so this felt like the time to do it. And everybody, the past team members, I went back to folks who are retired from Microsoft who were there in the day. Everyone was very willing to talk, very generous with their time, very willing to share like some real truth.
Okay.
Like some, wow, that's an uncomfortable story, dude. It was interesting.
So your goal was not just to document the history of PowerShell as a technology. It was more to, you had a wider scope in terms of these stories are more meaningful than, just how we got verb-noun commandlets.
Yeah, it's the story of the people, and it's the story of the political system that they lived within. And there's a lot there. Another thing too, I mean, quite frankly, in writing it, look, I grew up in the Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer Microsoft era, and I will always feel a certain way about Microsoft. And almost every month now, I will see the company do something, and I have to stop myself and go, this is not the Microsoft. I don't know who you are, but you're not Microsoft. And I think the book really highlights that. I think, when you read that, it puts the present in really sharp contrast with the past, and you realize fully how far the company has come, and how it has changed the type of product they build, and how they feel about things, and how they treat their users, and how they treat their customers. And it's, again, that's something that it would be easy to get lost. Like, it's not like Satya standing up on stage going, hey, remember when we were all assholes who hated Linux? But that was a thing. Like, Linux was a cancer on the ass of mankind. And I want people to remember that in some small way. And I want them to remember that even though Microsoft was like that, a product like PowerShell still happened.
Yeah, that makes sense. So who how did you do this? I know that you did interviews. So who did you end up talking to? I mean, you were obviously there for a lot of it. You've known a lot of the people involved for 10, 12, 15 years, maybe. Probably not 15, but 12 anyway.
Yeah, well, 15. Yeah, 2005. No, back then they couldn't tell these stories.
Sure.
It would have made the company look bad. It would have made them look bad. There would have been repercussions. I mean, Prime Valentine was all about repercussions. I talked to Daryl Ray. He was the earliest. He was heading up the Kermit project before Jeffrey Snover was even involved.
Okay.
Bruce Payette, who moved over to the Kermit project-ish. Lee Holmes, Ken Hansen, a bunch of other program managers were, not so much interviews, but we exchanged emails and I got some good clarification on stories. Obviously spent a ton of time talking to Jeffrey.
Okay.
We've had a few go rounds. Oh gosh. There are other stories that, I had collected myself. Like I remember the perambulations they had to go through to show us workflow in PowerShell 3 before it released at a time when you did not do that at Microsoft. Like that was not a thing that was possible, to even think about happening.
Okay.
So I was there for some of those, and I kind of interviewed people, and as I started interviewing, I wrote the narrative. I'm not a good note taker, so I wrote the chapter, and then as I would interview someone else, and they would have some more detail on it, I would go rewrite the whole chapter.
Okay.
And so the book's probably been written 12 times by now.
Wow.
Yeah, but I write fast, and so that it's just easier for me that way. And I'll do it. Well, it won't be a rewrite. It's off for copy editing now.
Okay.
So I'll have, like, by the end of May, beginning of June, I'll have to go through and deal with the copy editing fallout from where the copy editor tried to make me not look like a moron. And then there's like a few little clarifications that I've picked up in the meantime that I need to stick in that I'm just not doing now because I'm writing the whole book in GitHub and I don't understand the merge process super well, so I'm just waiting.
Okay. And so which piece, I know you've got the early history from the very beginning before, PowerShell
before
was
Monad.
Yeah, before Monad even.
Yeah.
So how far up to now does it go?
It pretty much stops at version 2.
Okay.
So I think the last thing I do is I talk about the version 2 design sprint, which was very different than the V1 design, which wasn't a sprint at all. It was a marathon. There are some good stories from V2, and I kind of stopped there. There's a little bit of touching on V3. Workflow is the main notable thing in V3, right? So I kind of touch on that because in retrospect, it was a horrible idea, and everybody admits it now. But the thing is that if you learned PowerShell 2, like if you understand PowerShell up to 2, everything else is just, okay, it's a little bit more of the same.
Right.
DSC, start state configuration, obviously a big deal. It's not PowerShell per se. It's just kind of more of the same thing.
Right.
Version 3 added a quadrillion commandlets, but it was more of the same thing. Like the heart and soul and mind of PowerShell honestly stopped nearly at V1. If they had been able to get remoting working in V1, which was on the original plan, then V1 would have been PowerShell. And after that, it would have just been add more commandlets.
Wow.
So that's really where the narrative kind of ends.
Okay. That makes sense. And I'm sure there's a lot of story around the whole push to get it into open source. There's got to be a lot of work there. Really?
No, there's not. Weirdly, that the push into open source which started with the docs, the help files, that was a push. By the time it came to do PowerShell open source, Microsoft's culture had changed so much that I think a lot of people, and I don't want to diminish it. It wasn't like everyone just said, oh, sure, yeah, why not? It wasn't that at all. But it was more about talking about why we want to do this and what are the outcomes and what are the drivers, and not just a no and then a bunch of fighting.
Okay, sure. PowerShell
was originally a no and a bunch of fighting.
Yeah.
The move to open source, once .NET Core was a thing and open source, like a lot of barriers went away.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So and I wasn't in the middle of that story. Even Snover wasn't as day to day with PowerShell at that point. And I'm sure there's a story there, but I'm probably not the one to tell it.
Yeah, and it's probably not as interesting as some of the early stuff.
Yeah, there definitely was a little bit less battling going on. I mean, the Windows architects went into a Bill Gates review meeting with Jeffrey Snover. Jeffrey walked in after they had already been there. Someone had clearly primed Bill already, and they were there to kill PowerShell.
Wow.
Like they were there to tell it no. And if PowerShell, it was already in Exchange. If they had won, PowerShell would not have been in Windows, and it probably would never have been in anything but Exchange. That probably would have been the end of it.
Amazing.
So I mean, just the sheer amount of stuff that PowerShell had to do, and it was these stupid reasons. And you read it in the book. The Windows architects guys were like, look, there's 7 gates you got to clear in order to get in the box. And after you clear the 7th gate, you're going to find out there's an 8th gate, which is hell no. It's like no matter what you do, we're going to find a thing. And so the last hook that they were hanging their hat on to kill PowerShell was when you run a command in PowerShell locally, you get live objects. They have methods, you can do stuff. When you run a command against a remote machine, it gets serialized into XML, sent over, deserialized, and you've got a dead object, meaning there's no methods. It's just a static representation. And if the remote version of the object is changing, let's say it's a process, right? So there's something always changing about a process, memory, whatever. You don't see that reflected in your dead object because it's dead.
Sure.
And they went to Bill and said, well, that's inconsistent and that's going to confuse people and we can't do that. And Bill's like, well, yeah, you got a point there. And, like Snover had to pull something out of his butt in that meeting, or Bill probably would have endorsed killing it.
Wow. Yeah, and I'm sure if Bill said it was dead, it was dead.
Weirdly, people should read the book because the story he pulls out of his butt is absolutely epic. But he mentioned at another point that, he was talking to Bill about PowerShell, and Bill said something to the effect of, we're really going to be able to leapfrog Linux here. He's like, yeah. Bill got it. Bill understood PowerShell, but it didn't matter. Like having Bill on your side was, it turns out, not that big of a deal.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess at that point he was head of the board because Ballmer was.
I think he was like the chief technology officer or something like that.
Okay. Was that before Ballmer, or was Ballmer CEO at that point?
Ballmer was CEO at that point.
Okay. Yeah, I don't imagine Ballmer was in a lot of those meetings.
Ballmer was a sales guy.
Yeah.
That's what he knew and cared about was sales. He did not make a lot of technical decisions. He had other people to do that, like Bill, Sinofsky, Brian Valentine, Bob Muglia. Those people were running the business, and they had people like Snover who were supposed to be making their technical decisions.
Right.
PowerShell was a big enough deal that you could have those conversations with those higher up guys, like they had to be involved. But like Snover took technically a demotion to do PowerShell.
Wow.
Like there's like all these things people are like, wait, what? He took I'm like, yeah. That's a fun story too. He and you know how Snover is because you talked to him, right? He doesn't hold a lot back, and if it's a one-on-one conversation, there's not a lot of language filters. But the cleaned up version is he wants to do this thing. There's this team doing it. He tells his boss, look, I want to flip over to this team and do this because I believe in this. Like, this is what I want to do. And she says, well, I don't know that's a good idea because you've kind of had performance problems. And he's like, no, literally not aware of that. She said, well, if you stay here, we probably don't have to do anything. But if you move over there, we'll have to demote you.
Oh my gosh.
What the F are you talking about? So he goes over to the guy who's running the group he wants to go to, who incidentally is the reason Snover was at Microsoft.
Wow.
He's like, I didn't take a job at Microsoft. I took a job to work with this guy. And the guy's like, well, well, look, let's just see how you do, and then we'll make a call. And so they went for a while, and he said, look, you're fine. You don't have a performance problem, but honestly, the level of work you're doing does not justify the pay grade we have you at. So he went from a level 68 to a 67, or so. He went one pay step down. Kept his title and all, but he went one pay step down. He was still an architect type person. But yeah, he took a pay cut, and now the guy is a technical fellow, and he's now the
he's
chief
a CTO. Yeah,
he's the CTO for this whole business unit in there. Oh God, he's going to rub that in Racinovich's face. Oh, that's going to feel good.
I was wondering about that if he now outranks Racinovich.
No, because Racinovich is the CTO for Azure.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that.
You're not the CTO for all of Microsoft. You're the CTO over this large business unit.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But yeah,
it doesn't matter.
It's so funny.
Racinovich is still like 6'4" and a Greek god, so it doesn't matter. He's got nothing to worry about. Yeah,
it's funny to hear those two go back and forth, though.
It is. It's a good time.
It's more one way than the other, but
well, part of the fun, because I was speaking with Snover at a tech ed, and Racinovich gets really he pays attention to session ratings.
Okay.
And there's a lot of speakers who work the science of session ratings. Like there's certain time slots that more people will show up and rate you. So if you do a good job, you get a higher count, which impacts your rating.
Okay.
Like there's a science to it. People get super weird about it. Snover could give a shit.
Right.
Like he does not have an ego that operates that way, but he will poke the buttons of anybody he figures out does. Hardcore. And those two are going at it. And I'm in the hallway going, can I go? I'm super uncomfortable right now and I want to go. Yeah, he does have a lot of fun with it. And that's the thing is he does not have this ego at all. Like he's just this, guy from Boston who swears a lot and drinks Budweiser, not Bud Light.
Yeah, it's I've really enjoyed every time I've got the chance to talk to him. To see that this week that he is a CTO now is just amazing to me. So so that's a complete move for him because he was not because he was doing Office AI something over there.
Yeah.
But this is something completely new.
Well, I think they're reorganizing a lot of stuff. I think they're taking a lot of because it's not just productivity apps right now. We went through this period of time when you bought a new version of Word because they added 89 features and rearranged the toolbar. And that was too much. And they've scaled everything back now. So like the Word you have on my iPad is super similar to the Word you have on a full Windows machine. And there's whole companies who just use Google Docs. Like they don't have locally installed word processors anymore. It's just, I just use a Google Doc.
Right.
Google Docs is not full featured. It's like the opposite of full featured. It deliberately tries to cripple you. Like when you sign up for G Drive or G Suite, the company comes by and breaks 2 fingers on every employee's hands. Like that's its level of productivity. And that's where the world is right now. And so I think Microsoft is looking at all this stuff and thinking, okay, what does the modern workforce actually need? What do they do? And how do they work? And I'm sure they've, stood over the shoulders of people and watched them work and realized that everyone has 600 tabs open in their browser and they're flipping between them all. And it's horrible because we're still restricted to this document constraint. That's the framework we work in. And so I don't know if you saw that the whole fluid office.
No, I didn't.
You want to work on. Yeah, so you don't have documents anymore. You just have components. You have text blocks and tables and charts, and those things can be combined in any way you want to, but it's not a document. It's an artifact.
Okay.
And so they're trying to look at how people work now and rethink all that stuff. And it takes a lot of AI. Like if you tell me every business document you've ever made, every PowerPoint, every spreadsheet, every Word doc, I don't know what else, websites, all those are now going to be broken down into small individual discrete artifacts. You're not going to have a report anymore. You're going to have some text and a chart and a thing and everything else, and it's all just going to live as separate elements. My first thing is, that sounds horrible and confusing. How will I find everything? But the answer is a crap ton of AI.
Okay.
And so the smarts that live behind all this, like as our apps become simpler, the back end has to be 18 times smarter.
Oh, sure.
And so I think that's the type of thing he's working on.
So that is, in a sense, very similar to what he was doing at Office, just kind of a next step, a growth of that, maybe.
Yeah, I based on what I'm reading, I suspect that it's kind of a product reorganization and then a new leadership model to run that as a business unit.
Okay. So
But I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Who were your favorite? What were your favorite interviews? I mean, did you talk to people on the phone? Did you fly out to Seattle and talk to people, or what did you end up doing?
I was actually going to sit in Jeff's Balls downtown and talk to Ken Hansen and Bruce Payette, but then the world had to shut down.
Oh yeah,
and so I didn't make it. Snover definitely. Like he and I go way back. I love the guy. And he's incredibly fun to talk to. Super colorful. He tells great stories. Ken Hansen was a great interview. And now Kenneth was a program manager during V1, and he was the program manager during V2. So he was kind of over the entire thing by V2. And he did that for V3, V4. I'm pretty sure he helped push 5 out the door, and he's at AWS now.
Mm-hmm.
And
so is Bruce, right?
Payette is too. And so is Angel Calvos.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I've been in the group for a long time. Ken was always this like super chill, very, very business-like, very laid back, very not excitable. Just, this is how we get work done and this is what we're going to do. Like just a rock. Like I can imagine in a team that as people are running around tearing their hair out, he's like, everyone stop, we'll get wigs, it's fine. But, now obviously not in the company and reminiscing, like he's got great stories. He's just as good a storyteller as Snover. He doesn't curse quite as much. But those were some amazing, amazing stories. Bruce is super analytical.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Like he's and if you've ever seen him speak, like if you've not seen him talk about some of the PowerShell, language design decisions, he did a talk at PowerShell Summit a couple of years ago. That's Bruce. Like mega engaged, like just super, super there, very smart. Not so much a storyteller maybe, but just the data and the facts that he has. So I tried to take a lot of that and then add the stories that other people would tell to add some color and some context to it and everything else. But I think at the end of the day, it was probably Bruce and Ken. And it's a tight race too, because I could literally sit and talk to Lee Holmes all day long.
Oh, sure. Yeah. You can talk to him about anything.
Everyone thinks Lee's the security guy, but he actually did a design for workflow. And if they had used his design instead of going with Windows Workflow Foundation, we'd probably all be using Workflow today.
I'll bet. Yeah.
It would probably be cross-platform. There's an interface, AMSI, the anti-malware scanning interface, that PowerShell was the first product to consume. So Lee had to convince the operating system people to produce this interface so that any anti-malware vendor, not just Windows Defender, could use it, because otherwise, antitrust, right?
Yeah.
And then PowerShell was the first one to consume it. And it's freaking brilliant. Just like the subtlety of it, and to first of all, to imagine doing what it does.
Okay.
And second, to think, I'm going to go convince the Windows team to do this. Be like, I'm just going to go shoot myself in the head. but like he did. And it's just, they're amazing stories. And he's such a fun guy to talk to.
So one of the things I was surprised about when I read the book is I always thought Jim Truer was a software engineer. But in the book, it said that he was not. He was a project manager.
Yeah. And there's a line that gets crossed a bunch.
Okay.
Snover has code that's in Windows PowerShell. And for all I know, in PowerShell core, I've never looked. A lot of the program managers knew how to code and did code.
Okay.
Especially in the early days when they were stressing to get this thing out. Like when it was definite that V1 was not making it into Windows, they had to go find a new customer, and it was Exchange. It was extremely fortuitous. The guy that Snover moved to Microsoft to work for was now in charge of Exchange.
Oh, nice.
And he happened to run into him. And the guy's like, yeah, we realize we suck at scale, and we want to do this Exchange Online thing eventually, and it just won't scale. So we're doing this whole administrative, automation interface. And so we're like, woo? And so they start talking, and he's like, well, maybe my guys should talk to you, and maybe we should do the thing you're doing. And that's why Exchange actually has a middleware API layer, because they had already written it.
Okay.
So, as that whole thing was happening, they kind of had to shift their focus, and Exchange was the customer, and what Exchange needed, the team would get done, and pretty much everyone had to pitch in and do it. And that continued through V2. The ISE only existed because this one PM, basically, I think it was a PM. He may have been a software engineer. Pretty sure it was a PM though. Said, look, we need this, and I think I can do it. And Ken said, we don't have time or resource. And the guy said, well, what if I just do it on my own time? And it's like, well, you got to get it through test too. Well, test volunteered. They said they can, and he just did. Like, there's so much of it. And that's one of the reasons that, the book is so much more than a history of PowerShell. It's these skunkworks people who had a vision, and they were bound and determined to make this thing happen. And they just did whatever the hell they had to do to make it happen.
Wow. Did you learn anything during your research that surprised or shocked you that you didn't really know anything about?
Yeah. I had no idea what the -out buffer common parameter was for.
What's it for?
So the original theory, and this is still true. Like, you can totally do this. You can do it in PowerShell core cross-platform today. But the original theory was, you could have command 1, pipe command 2, pipe command 3. And command 1 is local. Command 2 isn't, though. Command 2 is on a different computer. And so if command 1 is producing 10,000 objects and shipping them over to command 2, that's going to be really chatty on the network. And so what you might want to do instead is have it batch up every 100 and just send them in a burst.
Okay.
And then the next 100 in a burst. That's what -out buffer does.
Wow.
It defaults to 1.
Okay.
But even on a fully local command line, you can change it. Not really much reason to, but you can. And the command you tell a higher out buffer to will save up that many objects before it streams them on to the next object.
So you can use that to control the way objects flow through the pipeline.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
That was even in there. It's another thing. It almost wasn't. Like, they had this idea and they wanted it to happen. So Ken Hansen keeps doing his status updates every week, and the developer who's in charge of this keeps leaving out buffer off his status. And Ken has to be like, look, where is it? And at one point he's like starting to get really sore, and not standing on a table and screaming, but like, dude, what is your problem? And the guy says, well, that's going to take 6 weeks to write. And Ken's like, oh my God, we're already behind schedule. I can't burn 6 weeks to do this unless I have to. So he goes to Jeffrey and says, look, I'm being told 6 weeks. I don't have 6 weeks to give it. Jeffrey's like, what are you talking about? Sits down and writes it in 13 lines of code. They give it back to the developer, and the developer's like, oh, well, if that's how you want to do it.
I'm guessing that developer's not part of the team anymore.
No. They apparently had a couple of problematic people. Payette was given an engineer who had never used a command line and didn't know how to script, who was going to write the parser.
Oh gosh.
And that apparently went super well. Some things they didn't catch. They had a lot of ideas for, so we have the 6 streams: verbose, warning, success, debug, error, and information. And the theory was that you would be able to create new streams on the fly, and you could feed objects to whichever stream you wanted to. And the streams could be cyclical. So, you could produce a bunch of objects and imagine like a super advanced where object statement. If objects meet good criteria, they go off to this pipeline. And if objects don't meet good criteria, they go off to another pipeline where we're going to massage them and then bring them back in and evaluate them again.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And the guy who was writing those bits of the shell only understood standard in, standard out, standard error.
Okay.
And they said, no, you're not writing a command line shell. You're writing an engine that's going to be a directed graph, and it might be a cyclical directed graph. And he nodded and went down and wrote a command line shell. And by the time they realized that this was hard coded to be a command line shell, it was too late to roll it back.
Oh, man.
And so that never happened.
That's a cool story. So I remember
they're all such cool stories. Yeah, there's so many in there, and if you read it, even going back and reading the drafts, it's like, oh, this is such a cool story. People need to read this.
So did you find out what the story was behind providers? Because at one point, right, there was a lot of talk in the community about providers versus commandlets and which one makes more sense. And, commandlets eventually won. But
yeah,
I never did hear kind of what the feelings were inside the team, how any of that stuff worked.
Yeah, so this is all in the book, by the way. It's funny that so the API that you use to write commandlets may have been one of the first APIs in Microsoft to go through extensive usability testing, meaning they sat developers down and said, here you go, write a commandlet, and then watched them. And then they would change the API to deal with, oh, look, everyone struggles with this, let's change it. So they iterated on that a whole bunch. So writing commandlets is stupid easy. Like, it's nuts easy. It's a template in Visual Studio, and you just write code to do whatever you're going to do. And the fact that PowerShell has to do something is almost totally hidden from you. You don't need to see it. It's just like, nope, output this, output an error. Here you go. Everything else is magically done for you.
Okay.
They didn't do that with providers. And so the provider API is a lot harder. It's a lot more complicated. There's a lot more to deal with because it tries to abstract data stores. The feeling was that anytime you had to deal with data storage, like some sort of persisted data, that a provider was probably going to be the right way to do it.
Okay.
And it didn't work out. I think it didn't work out for 2 reasons. One, and most of the team members that I've spoken to about it have kind of agreed. They've said, one, we made providers too hard. And it was so easy to write commandlets that why would you not just write 7 million commandlets?
Okay.
I think the other reason is that as a user, get AD user is so much more intuitive than get minus item while I'm in the AD drive.
Right.
Like I don't think about AD as a drive. I'm not there. I'd rather just run a command. Like, one of their core values was, if you learn it once, you won't regret it. Like, we want to preserve your learning investment. And that's why, like, providers do that. If you learn how to use those couple dozen commands, they work everywhere. But they don't always work super well.
Okay.
Like for new AD user, you've got a whole mess of, you've got a parameter for name, you've got a parameter for department, you've got one for title. Like, it's really specific to the thing it's doing.
Right.
Imagine if you were just doing new item.
Yeah.
Then you would have to do new item property this, new item property that. Like, it would actually be harder. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the other reason, is that those things just don't abstract to the level that I think they originally envisioned.
If I'm remembering this correctly, I used a version of Monad that had an AD provider built into it that got stripped out?
I think they did, yeah, because the team was not willing to own that code.
Okay.
And also so here's the thing with Microsoft at the time. You could write all the code you wanted, but if it couldn't make it through test, you couldn't ship it.
Okay.
And test had a certain amount of bandwidth. And a lot of code was written inside Microsoft back then that never made it through test and never made it out the door. A lot of it made it into a little something called the resource kit. And the resource kit was the graveyard for untested code. And so a lot of things got dropped because of that. That's why the exchange commandlets actually do a little bit of AD work as well. Because like to create a brand new user with a mailbox, that's an AD user, right? Exchange doesn't have users. It has AD users that are mailbox enabled. So the Exchange team had to take on some of that work. So the PowerShell team probably didn't want to own the code, and the AD team probably wouldn't give them the time of day. And anything they had written, they probably didn't have room to get through test, and so they had to scuttle it.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah, I can't remember if when the Active Directory team when we finally started getting those commandlets as part of RSAT, I can't remember if there was ever an AD provider the way that there was in Node. Was there? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess at that point, I just completely abandoned that.
Yeah. So they use the AD provider in kind of a weird, non-standard, brilliant way. And this is where I think the team missed a trick with providers, if I'm being really honest. And that you don't use the AD provider so much to walk the AD tree like it was a file system. You use it to create an authenticated context that's persistent. And so whatever AD drive you're in, when you run an AD command, it uses that security context.
Okay.
So from one PowerShell, you can map drives to 10 different domains using different credentials. And when you switch to a drive, it'll use its credentials to run your commands. Okay.
So that way you can kind of switch back and forth between domains without having to re-authenticate every time. And
right. Or have 18 copies of the shell open. Like, it's really, really brilliant. And I don't think they talked about it enough because I don't think anybody else really ever grokked that.
Okay.
Right. What we wound up seeing instead was kind of the Exchange online model where you remote into a run space and that's your authentication. And you can have connections to 10 of those. But that was definitely a period at Microsoft where architecturally they were struggling with persistent security contexts. Like in Microsoft's head, why do you have 5 domains? Well, we do. Well, we're giant, we're Microsoft, and we only got one freaking domain. And like, we don't get your problem. And that's kind of how they were. And Microsoft had this, real pride that we dog food our software and we're our own worst customers. And it was not true. Like Microsoft was not nearly as epically screwed up as some of their customers.
Yeah. Have you ever acquired another company that's got 7 domains?
Right. Exactly.
That's fun. That's fun.
Exactly. Or take a giant regulated company like a pharmaceutical. A lot of the big pharmaceuticals have a standalone unregulated company that is the IT department, which then sells its services to all the other regulated ones.
Wow.
So that not all the company has to be regulated. And so they've got one master domain, but then they've got, 11 other domains that they have to take care of. And it's just like the world is ugly and messy. And a lot of the people at Microsoft at that time truly just did not grasp how ugly and messy the world really was.
Yeah, my brother is a director in IT at Purdue. And one of the things that really surprised me is that in university systems, a lot of the colleges, there's like no integrated systems in a university.
No.
It's like they all have their own infrastructure, their own administrators.
It's Mad Max. And part of the reason for that is, you're the director of IT for the university, and that the guy or the gal running that college has 12 PhDs, and they're way smarter than you, and they're not afraid to tell you that.
Right.
It's the same in hospitals. Like, how can you just be an IT schmuck running around with a bunch of literal doctors,
right,
who are telling you how things are? Like, no, I want to get to all my patient records on my iPhone. Okay, look, I don't know how to explain what a bad idea that is, but like, what are you going to do? I'm a doctor. Oh, yeah, I get it.
Yeah. One of the questions I have after reading the book is you kind of touch on, to me, as somebody who was, going through that period of time, the things that were driving PowerShell in the community were, on the Microsoft side, there were Exchange. On the non-Microsoft, it was like VMware, and it was Quest software, and people were leveraging PowerShell to manage those tools, which were then in turn managing Microsoft technologies. How important was that to PowerShell's early life in V1 and V2? Did they take that? Did they use that, or was it just about Exchange? No,
I think it was super important. So I mean, V1 was all about Exchange.
Okay,
but that was the first release. By definition, everything came after that.
Right.
No, I think they were hugely important, and I would love to have included some of that in the book, honestly, except so many of those people are gone.
Oh, sure.
They're just like, Quest software, Dmitry Sotnikov is just like, tracking folks down is really, really hard. I was never that into the VMware side of things, so I didn't have context there. I did try to kind of summarize what third parties in general were doing. I think they were hugely important. I think it gave a lot of credibility to PowerShell inside Microsoft, that so many major Microsoft, ecosystem partners were committing to PowerShell and saw it as a good thing and were using it, and that it was solving customer problems. I think it reinforced the message. I think it became a little easier, perhaps, to go to the Hyper-V team and say, hey, VMware uses PowerShell. What's your plan? Right? So it was important. Absolutely. There's a little less of a story there, only because by then you weren't leading, you were following.
Okay.
And it was important overall to PowerShell's long-term life and success, but I don't sense that there was a bunch of, insane struggles for political control, like the shell itself had to go through.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then you talked about the common engineering framework in the book, some of that.
Yeah, the criteria, the common engineering criteria. Yeah, the CEC. PowerShell eventually did make it to the CEC. It did not make it in as strong of a language as I think people had hoped for.
Okay.
Like that it was you have to provide management via PowerShell. That could mean writing commandlets. That could have meant writing some .NET classes. That could have meant just writing a WMI provider. And the CEC was never a requirement. It was always a strong recommendation. And a lot of people, frankly, blew it off.
Okay.
SQL Server, notably, will do whatever the hell SQL Server wants to do, no matter what. And then they will explain why you're wrong.
And that's why we have DBA tools, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it, because someone had to put some sensibility around that nonsense.
So for people who may be considering getting this book, which I recommend anybody who would listen to this podcast is going to love the book, I would say.
Yeah, this is definitely an ode to PowerShell fans, for sure.
Okay. And I know that you talk a little bit about the community. You've got a chapter about that. You've got some quotes for some of the people who were early MVPs. And I think that's really cool.
I interviewed several of the original MVPs. I solicited quotes from just general people who use PowerShell who felt it really had an impact on their career. And I think there's some great lessons there to take away. I mean, some of the things, it wasn't just, it changed my career. It was like, let me detail exactly why it changed my career and what I said to make it do that. I think there's some great lessons there. There's a section on some other things that, PowerShell's greatest misses, things that landed with a thud or just never came to be that would have been kind of cool. There's I think 3 whole chapters on different design decisions. Like if you've ever wondered, why does it work this way? That explains it. Okay. They're like, oh, and sometimes it's like, literally we had to ship it on a Wednesday and this is all we got done. I'm like, well, okay. I mean, there you go. And then, the bulk of it is kind of a vaguely chronological history starting way pre-PowerShell when the plan was to port Bash to Windows. That was the genesis of what became PowerShell. Was let's just port Bash. No, sorry, Corn Shell. We're gonna port Corn Shell to Windows.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad they didn't do that.
Well, they practically have now. We have Bash on Windows now.
It's like sure.
Big circle.
Yeah. So I've got some questions here from our group. Were there any discussions about writing better error messages in the beginning?
Yeah. I don't know how much of this I wrote in the book. The short answer is yes, but some developers went way off in a weird direction, and then they only had time to do what they did. The other bit of that is, like, you got to understand that PowerShell doesn't actually do very much. PowerShell is a wrapper around .NET and SIM and WMI and COM. And it's a wrapper around all these other things. Its job is to make 18 different things look like they're one thing. Okay. And so if PowerShell is calling some COM object that was written in the 1940s, and some of them feel like they were, and it barfs up an unintelligible error message, like that's all PowerShell has to work with. That's all it can give you. So, like if you're like, yeah, I'm using the Microsoft Office .NET automation tools, and it's those are crappy. Don't use those ever. There's nothing PowerShell can do to make those look pretty.
Yeah, I remember doing stuff with the Office COM objects.
Here's the thing. People will tell you, oh, no, I'm using the .NET ones. The .NET automation stuff is a tissue-thin wrapper around COM objects. It's still all COM.
Wow.
All the way down to the turtles. Yeah.
That's sad.
Yeah.
So another question is, can you talk about whether third-party vendors were pushed either in a snap-in direction or a module direction early on? Because I know that VMware famously had snap-ins forever.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So originally all you had was snap-ins. And there was a reason for that. And they had talked about both modules, which are what we call an Xcopy deployment, right? And you've got snap-ins, which are a full install that get registered in the registry. And the reason they went with snap-ins, and this is in the book, is basically because the Windows architect who was advocating for snap-ins had more political pull. And so if they did it his way, he would shut up and they would have fewer fights to fight.
Wow.
That's God's truth.
Yeah, I was surprised to hear that when I was reading the book, because I thought that I didn't realize that modules were basically ready to ship in V1.
Yeah.
I thought that was totally a V2 thing.
No. So that's not true. Modules weren't ready to ship in V2. They could have gone either direction, and for V1 they went snap-ins. They did not do any development for modules.
Oh, okay.
The module story is actually in the book too. That was part of the V2, and that's in the design decisions section. And that was a pretty Lord of the Rings epic tale. And when people read that, they need to understand that it's okay to have professional disagreements and professional debates. That doesn't mean you're a bad person. So that's in there. once modules had come out, I think most vendors were honestly just, you know, it's non-trivial to break a snap-in apart and turn it into a module in some ways. There's another concern too, which is one of the reasons that this one Windows architect was advocating for snap-ins. With an Xcopy deployment, when you go to patch your product, you don't know what's there. Like there's no central list of where all the shit is. And relying on something like PS module path to auto discover things is fine, but you can still load a module that's not in the PS module path. But you can't patch it. Like you'd have to scan the entire hard drive to see if your code was there, or so you would know to patch it. With a snap-in, on the other hand, it's registered. There's a spot in the registry that says this is installed, here's where it's located. And I suspect VMware, simply for ease of patching, stuck with snap-ins for a long time.
Yeah, even Microsoft doesn't do modules perfectly, even now. Like I know that the SCCM commandlets, in order to use them, you have to have the console installed. And, and it doesn't even put them in the PS module path. You know, you've got to...
No, you have to have the console installed because they never broke their well, and I don't know if this is still true. I know they've been doing tons of work, but originally it's because the console installed all the prereqs. Like all the bits that made everything work. And the commands were just another way to get to those same bits. They didn't do commands and then do a console on top of the commands. They did it kind of the opposite way. The first release of the SCCM commandlets was kind of an abomination. I mean, they were only compiled for 32-bit. It's like push the other compile button, fool. I'm not sure they got it, and I honestly haven't looked at it. And geez, that was System Center 2010 or something insane like that. It was a long time ago. So I don't know if it's changed, but
it's gotten better over time. I can tell you that they've gradually added commandlets that allow you to do increasingly complex operations deeper into the product.
That's good. That's good.
Which I really needed.
A lot of times it's like, this is all we can afford to ship right now. A lot of times there's weird architectural things like take the SharePoint commands. And I'll be right up front, I'm not a huge fan of SharePoint. And if you are, that's fantastic. God love you and your family. I'm not. And I never have been, and I probably never will be. And the commands, it's not that they suck. It's just that there's only so much you can do when this is your architecture.
Yeah.
You know, you can only put so much paint on it. And sometimes that's what it is you have an architecture that was just never designed. You know, it's this massive asynchronous, weird front page based goofiness. And you can only fix that so much. So sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's like you legit have people working on code who do not understand what administration is or scripting. and like if someone doesn't understand the problem, then they're not going to provide a good solution.
Right. Yeah, and if they don't have strong leadership telling them, hey, you really need to do it like this, then...
Yeah, or if someone does say it and they're like, well, that would be hard. I know, but we pay you so much money. And that happens too.
So I know that we have been talking for about an hour. I don't know how much time you have, but what else would you like to... Oh, sure.
I want to get an offer out. So anybody who picks up so the book is on LeanPub, leanpub.com/shell of an idea, and each word is separated with a dash. So shell dash of dash un dash idea. And I'm sure you'll put it in your show notes, and you can find it on my website at donjones.com. Anybody who gets that before I get my edits back and finished. So we're talking first couple weeks of June, if the stars align and the planets all work. If you get it on LeanPub before then you'll be getting the uncopy edited version. So don't bother telling me about the typos. I know that's her job. You will get the final version free of charge. That's how LeanPub works. And at the very front of the book, there's directions for letting LeanPub email you about updates. That's not a spam thing. That means anytime I upload a new copy of the manuscript, which is only going to happen once, you'll be notified, so you know, go download it. The notification I send once I have all my edits done will include a link to go purchase a hardcover copy of the book at printing cost, which should be between $15 and $18.
Oh, cool.
So if someone has been in the industry and PowerShell's been a part of your life and like you want a memento of this thing, I am not going to make that URL public. I'm not going to sell copies of the hardback. There will be a paperback sold somewhere, but there will never be another hardback. So the only way to do that is to go ahead and pick it up on LeanPub now.
Outstanding. So are there any other?
I will, for folks who are in the US, I will include, if you want an autographed copy, I will include a way to do that. It'll probably be like you buy the book and have it shipped to me and then like PayPal me $8 to ship it back to you or something like that.
Yeah, I would love to have a signed copy of that hardcover book. I need to make that happen.
And the other thing I'll do too is, I've done this once before with a book and it worked out well. If you send me a self-addressed stamped envelope, I will sign a label.
Oh, okay.
And you can stick it in your book. So that'll only cost you, $1.
Yeah, that'd be easier for you too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't care. That the people who are going to get the hardcover are the people who've probably gotten a lot of my books and who've really supported me and helped me pay bills and buy food and stuff like that. So I don't mind going to a little bit of trouble for folks.
That's awesome. So are there any other books you want to talk about while you're on here?
Shell of an Idea will probably be, it's the last technical book I can see myself writing. It'll be my last PowerShell. If folks haven't noticed, there will never be another Learn Windows PowerShell in a month of lunches, because there will never be another version of Windows PowerShell. It's done. There's other authors who are writing the Learn PowerShell in a month of lunches, the cross-platform version. I'm kind of onto fiction. If anybody, John, I don't know if you grabbed a copy of the Never, but the audiobook is done through production and we're submitting it to Audible Q&A next week. So, watch my Twitter feed, the audiobook. If you have one of the Audible subscriptions, you'll be able to get it as part of your subscription. That hopefully sometime in June. I don't know how long it takes Audible to go through their whole rigmarole, but hopefully sometime in June.
Yeah, I bought the Never and I bought Power Wave. That's the first one, right?
Yep, and Superior Wave is done. That's on LeanPub, and
I haven't read those
Amazon.
yet. I haven't read those yet, though, and I know that the Never is very important to you because it's
that is the first fiction story I ever wanted to tell, and for folks who don't know, it's this Peter Pan story, but in my version, the Peter Pan story is just a few chapters in the middle of the book. There's all the stuff that happens ahead of time and all the stuff that happens later, and it's not a children's book. And it's the story of the Fae, the fairies that Peter meets and almost destroys. And I really had a lot of fun writing it. The woman that narrated it, so it's my first professionally narrated audiobook. She's oh my God, her voice is just so beautiful, and she's like my queen. And you just like, it sends chills up my spine to hear her read it. And she said she grew so fond of the book. We came to the end. She said, look, I asked my audio guy to send me a copy of, new copies. I want these to be a little crisper. So I'm going to re-upload all the audio files. I'm like, they sound fine to me. She's like, no, I'm really fond of this book. And I really, really, I'm like, okay, cool. So yeah, that book's definitely a big deal for me. And that's on Amazon. It's coming off Kindle Unlimited.
Okay.
I don't know if it's still on Kindle Unlimited because the expirations for my books are a little spread out. But you can get paperback or ebook on Amazon. You can get ebook directly from LeanPub too. It's still available up there.
But to get the audio version, you go through Amazon to get the.
Yeah, it's Audible.
Okay.
And how does this work? If you own the book on Amazon, I think you will be able to get the audiobook for like another $1.
Oh gosh, wow.
And then if you have the Audible subscription thing, then obviously it's just part of that.
Okay. Yeah, I think the version I have, is the LeanPub version. I think I bought it on LeanPub.
It probably is. And I love it. I love it when people do that because I actually get money then, and you don't really with Amazon, but you get more exposure.
Okay. How have your fiction book sales been so far? Are you happy?
Yeah, I am. I mean, I'm not going to ever be Stephen King. I've made my peace with that. But The Never's been doing quite well. It's picked up a few reviews on Amazon, which if you like an author, please at least leave a star review and a one. This book was really good, like a 1-sentence review. Those Amazon won't even bring something up in search results if there's no reviews. Like, you really can just do a tremendous amount for an author just by doing that. Power Wave and Superior Wave were such pet projects. Like, I always wanted to write a superhero novel, but I had this like really specific vision for how heroes got their powers, and I wanted it to all go wrong on them. Like, my God, like, and so that's what that is, and it goes horribly wrong, and it gets the end of the last book is incredibly recursive, and they're short books. I think the second book is only like 80 or 90 pages. It's not going to take a bunch of your life. I've got a couple other projects I'm working on. I'm not doing those on LeanPub. I wanted to make something a little more beautiful. So I'm writing a book called Sentinels, and I think I was telling you at the beginning of the show. I woke up about a week ago with this fully formed story happening in my brain, and I rushed and just took a ton of notes, and I've been writing that book all week. And it's called Daniel Scratch, and it's a fantasy. I would say if you enjoyed the latter half of the Harry Potter novels, or if you enjoyed Ursula K. Le Guin's A Wizard of Earthsea, then this is a good fit for you.
Okay. But that's not going to be LeanPub. That's going to be some other.
No, yeah, I'm going to wait till that's done and go straight to press with that. However, if anybody listening to this wants to be a beta reader and not a copy editor, I have copy editor. I'm good with that. But like, I enjoyed this. This part felt too fast. This felt too slow. I don't understand what this character looks like or what this place is, like that type of thing to make the story better. If somebody wants to do that, by all means, hit me up, DM me on Twitter, include your email address and what format you want it in. I can do Mobi and EPUB, and I can send you what I've got now before it's done.
Okay.
And like, you can make some feedback and you'll get listed in the acknowledgments and all that fun stuff. But even Daniel Scratch is short. I've been using Scrivener, and I'm starting to not dislike it. And I've got 1, 2, 3, maybe like 6 chapters left, and it's telling me that I looked at the wrong dialogue box. It's telling me this is a 2-hour and 18-minute read. Right?
Okay.
Now. It's not a huge book.
And then,
but yeah.
Where is the third book of?
I don't know.
Okay. It's not on the list yet. Okay.
It's the Achilles Chronicles. It's Alabaster. That's out. Onyx is out. Verdant is the conclusion of the trilogy. And like, I have the base story, but I need my conflict and I need my twist.
Okay.
And I do not know how it ends yet.
Okay. Fair enough.
So I have to, because I don't want to just sit down and write something and have it be terrible. So I have to figure that out. That's like the one outstanding project I have that I've started and not finished, but it hasn't come to me yet. So I'm George R.R. Martining again.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the first 2 books. I'm looking forward to it.
I'm so glad.
Yeah, and Don knows this, but the rest of you don't. My daughter read that book for a book report for school. She read Alabaster, and she really liked it. And it was really cool that there was one, I forget, I came into the room, I think she may have been having breakfast, and she totally started geeking out about a specific part. And it had to do, I'll just say it had to do with a test and water. Yeah. And she was just flipping out about how cool that scene was. So, yeah.
Yeah, I really, that's another one that I've had in mind for a long time, and it was good to get it out. I I know what's going on in the third book. I need to figure out how it all ends, because it really does need to end. Like, there's not going to be a fourth book. It needs to. That's it.
Yeah, it's astonishing to me though that you woke up with an entire book in your head, like the entire.
I've written 36,000 words in about a week.
Wow.
And that's like legit never happened before, but every single day I get up and I've got this fully formed chapter because I have all of these notes about what's going to happen. And I am absolutely adoring how it's turning out. Like it will wind up being a book I read. And it will end with the possibility of more books in this world with these characters, I think. But I wanted to write something kind of in this vein. And I've been doing a ton of research on grade levels, like just writing a bunch of prose and then feeding it to these tools you can find online that will tell you what grade level you're writing at.
Okay.
And I wanted to write something that would appeal to maybe a 9th or 10th grader.
Okay.
That rated as a freshman college reading level.
Interesting.
And it's because that's the type of book I always liked. Like I would, if I didn't understand a word, I would learn it, and it made me a better talker.
Oh,
and
sure.
A better writer. Mm-hmm. And like I think so many kids are so much smarter than we often give them credit for, especially once you read a lot. They're reading way above their grade level anyway half the time. And I wanted to give them this fantastic fantasy world that felt real and realized and not silly, but also not following our rules. That was a story being told by an adult as his time, as someone their age. So like they're in the story, but it's the older version of themselves that's telling that story.
Interesting.
And so that's Daniel Scratch. That I want to, like, end of June. That'll definitely be done. It'll probably be done a lot earlier, but there's like a couple chapters that I'm fussing with.
It is crazy to me how fast you can write. It is just.
Oh, I know. I know. It gets everybody at work too. We were sitting in a Zoom meeting with 50 billion people, and like, what are we going to do? And we should do this. And so I just opened up a doc, and I'm like, because we're talking about something we had to communicate to the rest of the company or someone external, or whatever. And I'm just writing it, and they're all talking. And as they're saying stuff, I'm flipping back up and writing. And we finished 45-minute meeting, and I'd written an 8-page document. And they said, well, is someone going to do this? And one of my colleagues jumped on and said, yeah, Don already did. She said, that's why I got quiet. I was just sitting here in the shared Google Doc watching him write. It was a thing of horror and beauty.
So there's a question about, have you written the story of how you write stories?
I'm not sure I know yet. Okay. That's interesting though. I'll have to think about, it's so different. Like I'm writing this total one-off. Like, this is another pet project book. It's a book based on the Disney parks, which I know is a total, like, walked upon terrain. I get that, but I'm doing it for me, for me and a friend, because the main character is named after him. And I kind of got to a point where I'm like, I don't know what's next. Like, I like what this world is doing, but I don't know. And we were out taking a walk today, and he said something, and I said, because he wants to write a story. I said, you could do it in kind of a way to where maybe this happens and then this, and I'm like, oh my God, that's my book. Oh, that's what's going to happen. Oh, and I had to run home and take a bunch of notes. And so, sometimes you can't tell.
That's amazing. Yeah, so I think I'm definitely going to listen to the Never. It sounds like that's going to be a treat.
It is. I wish I had a way of feeding back. But once it goes live, you'll have access to the Audible always does a retail sample.
Okay.
So you'll be able to hear her voice. And she reads the first chapter. It's the prologue. And it's my queen. She looked down at his armor and saw that it had been touched by the rot. And she mourned the loss of magic. It was like, ooh.
So are you going to get to work with her are you going to get to work with her in the future on other books? Or how does that work?
If this book makes her a lot of money, because we split the proceeds.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So if this book, makes her enough money that she feels it was worth her time, then yeah, for sure. I'd love to.
Okay.
Can't be Daniel Scratch though. That's a male character.
Okay. So fun. Okay, Don, anything else you want to let us know about?
No.
Okay.
Don't be shy. If you see me on Twitter, say hi, or, if there's something I can do that's not a PowerShell technical question, because I think I'm probably not the right guy anymore, but, pop in and say hi or say something.
So you are talking about this book. You've done a couple of PowerShell user group meetings. Okay.
Yeah. And they're all different. I worked up about 6 different possible talks, and I had different user groups pick different ones. So you can actually listen to them all and get some feedback on different parts of the book, or some perspective on different parts of the book. The last one's going to be in June for the New York PowerShell users group with Doug Finke and those guys.
Do you know off the top of your head which groups you've done talks for already?
Chicago was the last one. And before that was, it wasn't a talk about the book. The Research Triangle folks, Mike Kanakis and those guys, I did my what was going to be my keynote for PowerShell Summit.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen some of that. I had to jump off that meeting. I need to go back and watch the YouTube for that one.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that. So that's up there.
So fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. It's always great talking to you.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
And like I said, if I can get my daughter to update that book report, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, I would love to read it. I really would. And tell her I really do. I think about it at least twice a week. I know I need to do the last one. I got to figure it out. If she has any ideas, she can let me know.
Yeah, she hasn't read the second one yet.
Okay, well, have her read the second one, and then she can tell me how the third one ends.
Okay. I don't think she knows. It'll be interesting to see what her take on that is, because I have strong feelings about AI. I've got a good understanding of the types of things that it would be capable of, but I don't think that's like so outside her realm. It'll be interesting to see what she does with that.
I got to tell you, I forget exactly where I left off with Onyx, because I had the first couple of chapters for Verdant planned.
Yeah, you sent me like kind of an outline, I think, at some point.
Yeah, not really. Yeah, so I mean, I strongly imply that aliens are about to land on the planet. That's what happens.
Okay.
And then I have to figure out, and the planet was always meant as a honeypot.
Okay.
Like they're literally the bait and a trap to bring these aliens in. And then what was supposed to be the planetary defense system is pointed inward so it can kill all the aliens.
Okay.
And obviously the people on the planet are like, no. So I have to figure out how to end it.
Yeah, the interface between the people and the machines, the way that you describe that is so cool.
That was the main idea I had. Like that was the idea that kicked it all off. So, all right, I need a cocktail.
Right.
I'm gonna go grab a drink.
All right.
Have a great night, John.
Thank you, sir.